some people say, well, I'm really hardcore about my dieting. I don't need to enjoy it. I just want to, put my head down, put in the work, trust the process, and do the damn thing. Unfortunately, what we find also is that rigid cognitive restraint also just doesn't seem to lead to favorable long-term outcomes with dieting. It seems to be, over the long term, a very demotivating factor that can lead to what they call motivational collapse, and ultimately the cessation of a diet. Basically, you discontinue the diet because you are very frustrated because you've set all these rigid guidelines, frame them as dichotomous, and you just find, based on your internal framing, that you fail and fail and fail and fail and fail. And so at some point you say, why do I keep trying this? I'm clearly not doing this well. So flexible cognitive restraint offers a completely different alternative. You give yourself some wiggle. So it was a very intentional effort, and the biggest misconception people have in this area is people call any form of dieting where you have macro targets or calorie targets, people tend to group that into this kind of category that they call flexible dieting. And what they mean by that term is it is flexible with regards to food source. Yeah. So your 20 grams of protein can come from chicken or eggs or tofu. That's the kind of flexibility that they're talking about with that term. But there are a lot of people who do flexible dieting with extremely rigid cognitive restraint. And so what we wanted to do was leverage that health psychology research, implement it, and make sure that we supported users in their journey, and make sure that we reinforce flexible restraint.
All right, so let's get an exercise question. And also, just so you guys know, this is a 1 year, going to be relatively quick for that rapid rebound, a bit of stretch shorten cycle action coming into the mix. But what's important there is to make sure that you have a really smooth and solid repeatable groove on all of your reps. And so when I see people with inconsistent bounces, most of the time it's because they have inconsistent grooves. And most of the time they have inconsistent grooves because they're either going too fast for the eccentric, or they're starting the kind of fast final descent a bit too high. So one of the things that might help with your consistency is taking a pretty well-controlled, relatively slow eccentric down to the point where you're only like just above parallel, and then only for that very, very bottom part of the eccentric, you just kind of like let go slightly, let yourself accelerate into the top cutting. How long am I allowed to cut before I need to do a maintenance phase? How long should that maintenance phase be? There's a lot of questions in that general area. And the good news, which is minimally helpful but maximally flexible, is it really there's no right or wrong answer here. So knowing when you end a cut it basically exclusively dictated by how you're feeling, both in terms of how you feel about your progress and how you are currently feeling in the moment as someone who's on a diet. So a lot of times people will ask, like, do I need to do maintenance phases in between to make the cut successful? And the answer to that is no. But there could be very good reasons to do maintenance phases along the way. When someone goes from an energy deficit into a bit of a maintenance phase, whether that's 1 week or 2 weeks or 12 weeks, just getting into neutral energy balance can do a lot of really positive things. Subjectively, you can feel a lot better, more energetic. It can give you a little boost in your exercise, your activity level. It might help your hunger levels calm down a little bit. There can be a lot of nice things that occur during a maintenance phase that basically allow you to metaphorically recharge your battery so that you can reinitiate fat loss just from a place where you're feeling really up for the task and ready for another. A lot of people kind of treat it in phases, right? They move on to the next phase. So there's no hard number that says when a cut should be over, and there's really no guideline about when maintenance phases should be done or how long they have to be. Absolutely. Let's see. Should I take a more recent or an older question in the chat? What do you think, Trex?
Whatever's on your heart.
All right. very quick app-related one from James Roby. He says on the new update, you can't see the current rate anymore on the trend weight page. Was that intentional? How do you know if you're on target? I thought it was good to see that to prevent too aggressively bulking or cutting. And I got something to show you for the camera. So you, Jay, are probably on either 1.5.0 or 1.5.1 right now. If you're on 1.5.2, on the weight trend page, you should get something that looks like what I am about to show the camera.
Right now, for the audio audience, there's a really interesting scene developing. Greg is holding his phone up to the camera, and yeah, very good, Greg.
So hopefully that was visible. I did not see my screen. Yeah, in 1.5.2, all of those trims and even more are there.
We're talking about the really complex interplay of systems that regulate hunger and satiety in terms of just the brain structures. So, you know, aside from just like food characteristics and dieting and things like that, but the neurophysiological integration of satiety control is very, very fascinating and absolutely very susceptible to alteration based on both short-term and long-term modifications in energy availability. So, you know, extreme examples, fasting for a few days, very pronounced changes in hunger and satiety relationships and management, losing and gaining considerable amounts of weight, very, very pronounced changes as well. But it's so funny because you look at some of the guidelines that come from it, and it's simple stuff. It's like, if you're struggling with, you know, really low satiety, high hunger, basic things, eating foods with low energy density, preferably below like 1.5 or 2 kilocalories per gram. And, you know, that's basically meaning foods that take up a lot of space on your plate. They have a lot of water, usually a lot of fiber content per serving. You know, those types of foods help fill up your belly. That's a positive thing because the actual acute distension of, you know, the pressure on the stomach does matter. Eating slowly.
That affects the old incretin response. The
Yeah.
GIP, GLP-1, all of that.
So back in the day, I did competitive bodybuilding. Two-sport professional athlete, but I don't want to bring a lot of attention to that. I don't want that to be the whole point of the podcast.
You don't want everyone who refers to you to add the epithet, the Bo Jackson of bodybuilding.
Correct. I really don't want that to occur. So everyone, please stop sending me those messages. But after competitions, it's not that unusual for competitors to be in a position where, because there's this massive dysregulation of both satiety-related regulation, but also just psychological factors of food intake. A lot of times after the final competition of a year, you'll see physique athletes who are in this very odd position that's difficult to explain. You kind of have to feel it, and you have to be there. But you're eating food, and you have filled your stomach, and you're like, I can tell that eating more food is not in my best interest. I'm going to feel like shit. I already feel like shit because I've eaten too much. And yet, you have this desire to continue eating that isn't even purely hedonic. It's not just like, oh, I like the taste of food, I'd like to taste more. But it's this weird thing where you're like, I know that I am not hungry right now, I'm actually quite full. And yet, for some reason, my satiety signals are not telling me to discontinue, and I still feel a non-hedonic urge to eat that isn't hunger. Or that is bodybuilding.
I have to say, the more I learn about it, specifically from like competitors relaying their experience, the more it just seems like the most deranged sport in the world. Like I don't know why anyone does it.
You know,
but it's also cool.
That's a whole podcast unto itself. Is what is this and why? Yeah.
All right. So here's a personal one from the Bees. Do you guys have any sports-related goals? Road to the stage, platform. Have you or have your perspectives and priorities changed over the years? So yeah, we no longer do the road to the stage or road to the platform segments on the Stronger by Science podcast. We're trying to trim it down, make it a tight, svelte package, and just kind of getting into the content quicker.
For example, our last episode was a very tight 2.5 hours, so we're making great progress there.
It's as tight as it could have been given the amount of content, I will say. But yeah, so sport-related goals. So my current and ongoing weight loss is, I wouldn't say it's with sport goals in mind, but it is with kind of like physical, kind of athletic related goals in mind. I'm not particularly interested anymore in necessarily trying to be the best, and being physically capable of being really good at a lot of things. And then I spent a little over a decade really focusing on one thing that I wanted to be good at, which was just being as strong as possible. And so now I'm going back to my roots and trying to become more of a generalist again.
Yeah. You should, what year was it that Vince Carter had that crazy dunk contest? Was that 2004?
I don't know. I'll search while you're answering.
Now that we're doing more stuff on YouTube, you should get to the point where you can just recreate that shot for shot, and we'll put it up and people will enjoy it.
It was 2000. Yeah, I didn't think it was 04.
Well,
but yeah.
You can't blame me. He was still playing like a year ago.
That is true.
Which is crazy.
Dude, he was still good too. I think he still had like a positive plus minuses last year.
Yeah. But for me, this is an interesting lead down, and it's a cool feeling when you get there. And I think in the next year or so, I'm very enthusiastic about getting back to that spot where I just have a really high level of confidence in my strength and just general physical capacity.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah.
I've mentioned this before, but we should play some sports together. Put some shots up. You play baseball. I think there's a field nearby. We can have like a little home run derby or something like that. That might be fun.
So I have
play some pickleball.
I've thought about I was thinking about getting into recreational sport leagues. Like, I would love to play flag football. I'd be all about that. But yeah, I definitely think that getting back into sports would be a lot of fun.
Sweet. Workouts take longer. So if I were to give kind of like a one-size-fits-all, how long should I rest between sets answer, it would probably be around 3 minutes per set. For a slightly more nuanced answer, you can probably go shorter than that for kind of like single joint accessory lifts. May not be a bad idea to go longer than that for compound exercises, especially lower body exercises, especially if you're reasonably strong, and especially if you're doing moderate or higher rep ranges. But yeah, somewhere around 3 minutes seems to get the job done. If you go to the gym and you kind of have a timer on you and you're like, man, I'm resting 3 minutes between sets, and that feels like forever, and I feel like I'm just not using my time efficiently, then something you could try just to use your time a little bit more efficiently is a superset approach, where you either go with an agonist-antagonist superset. So that means basically it should be a way to use your time a little bit more effectively, or like an agonist-distant superset. That's probably not the right terminology, but like pairing like an upper body exercise with a lower body exercise, just something that's not training the same prime movers. Also shouldn't compromise performance too much, but will let you kind of increase the density of your training. Or you could find something to do between sets to like pursue some other goal you have that wouldn't necessarily detract from your lifting. So for example, if you're trying to improve like hip flexion mobility or something like that, and you're currently doing pull-ups, you could do a set of pull-ups and then like stretch your hamstrings for a minute or two between sets.
And analytics that are informative and actionable. I'm not saying that we would never put that in from an analytics perspective, but I don't currently view that as a high priority item, because as I discuss in that longer segment, I think that focusing on really small differences in protein quality scores within the context of an entire diet, I don't think that that effort is fruitful or particularly worthwhile. In the podcast episode, I talked about how the research generally indicates if you're meeting some very basic general guidelines for protein intake, with the most important one being total protein intake for the day, and the second most important being how you distribute that throughout the day, any small differences in protein quality score.
Yeah, here's a good kind of retrospective question, since this is the Macro Factor 1-year anniversary. Looking back on the first year, do you have any regrets or things you would have done differently if given the chance to redo it all? And that is a difficult question to answer, I would say, because there are... So, you know, it's one of those things where you can learn a lot, or just kind of like know a lot from like, you know, like, I don't want to use this phrase, but like book learning, basically. And you can go into something with a game plan and a set of assumptions